Another amazing friend I'm very happy to introduce, our dear Christine Hemphill, all the way from her vacation, making the huge effort and joining us here. She's the founder and managing director of Open Inclusion, and she's going to talk about fast-growing, inclusive opportunities or new threats of exclusion from distributed work models. Christine?
Michal, thank you so much, and it is such a pleasure to see so many friends and people here today, and really just to take this time to think about a new format of, well, it's not a new format of work. In fact, it's probably one of the oldest formats of work, which is self-employment. But it is fast growing format, and it's a format that I think we need to really think about. How does disability inclusion play into this area, and how do we ensure that whether you're hiring someone as a permanent employee, a temporary employee, a contractor or a freelancer, that we consider disability inclusion right across the spectrum of different employment types. Right, let me just share this. Sorry, so you don't need to see the sides. Now, I do apologise, given that I'm not at home, if the Wi-Fi gets it all funky. It's been a little bit funky. Quick description. I'm a white, middle-aged woman, dark, short brown hair and a warm blue jumper on today with a quite nice green background that I can take no credit for. Right, Open Inclusion, as Michal mentioned, we're an organisation based in the UK but operating globally that really considers the needs of people with disabilities through insight, through research, through engaging with the individuals across different communities and listening and understanding, and then using that understanding to really inform better product and organisational design and solutions and outcomes. So I'm going to use a term that's a little bit of a made-up term. Christine, it's a Christine term. I do these. Distributed independent work. And what I'm trying to do is bundle a few areas of work together. Is it freelancers? Is it a digital nomad? What about a gig employee? What about contractors, solo entrepreneurs? Actually, I'm trying to group all of these together and essentially say distributed independent work is someone who is self-employed, who is either a freelancer, a contractor or solo entrepreneur, and they can work where they want. So they're not required to be at a certain client site and be on site. So that kind of cuts some of those contractors out. So what it's not is so I'm just going to see the other half of my screen, someone who's working in a more traditional employee-employer relationship, which is often in a stable team and in a stable relation, more stable income and outcomes, but also is required to work in a client office or other defined workspaces. Just so we're on the same page, we'll talk about language later. Sorry, not sure why that's not going down. So what's our experience of this? I should, given that we talked about us being a research organisation, we've had two really interesting and very rich experiences in the disability inclusive, particularly freelance workspace, but also some other independent workspaces. The first one is you'll get to hear from a lovely friend of mine and our colleague and collaborator over at Fiverr shortly, Aya, about the Fiverr Empower program. So I don't want to spend too much time talking about that. But over the course of the last year, it's been our absolute pleasure and privilege to work with Fiverr, who are one of the leading global freelance platforms on the Fiverr Empower program, supporting 3 different cohorts of people with different disabilities in 2022 and 23, and that included people from across the USA, Latin America, UK and Africa, and all of them kind of getting an unfair advantage as opposed to an unfair disadvantage as they stepped into the Fiverr program. And I'll let, as I mentioned, Aya tell you more about that. And you can see here an image of one of our team, Ali, talking about the Fiverr Empower program and just describing that to various NGOs and communities of people with disabilities that we work with to make sure that really fabulous talent is coming in through that. The other experience we had is because of this, we realised there was a lot more we didn't understand about this area of work than we did. So it was our real pleasure on the 12th of January to host a roundtable on this topic with 33 amazing leaders in the freelance space, the disability leadership space, employment, training, from across the world. So USA, Latin America, UK, Europe and Africa. And in fact, a number of the people that came and joined us, I know on this call. So we had a really rich conversation about what does this new format of work types, or these changing formats of work types, particularly as they're tech enabled now, what sort of opportunities do they bring to people with disabilities in the community, and what sort of threats, challenges or barriers do they bring with them as well, and how can we best address them? So that's kind of the grounding of what I'm sharing with you today. Why does this matter? Well, half of the global workforce, according to World Bank, is a freelancer or self-employed today. So 46.4%, or 1.57 million of the 3 point something million, whatever that is, global workforce. Sorry, I think that's meant to be billion, people globally. So there is a huge proportion of people. Now, this is actually significantly overweighted towards lower income countries. So it's up to 80% in lower income countries, and as low as a much smaller percentage, less than 20% in higher income countries. But this is changing fast, and as you can see in the lower stats, in 2017 there were 57 million employees who were freelance, 57 million freelancers in the US. By last year, that was 73 million, and it's forecast to grow to 90 million by 2028. So this is a really fast-moving part of workplaces all over the world, including, in developing and developed countries. It's a huge market and growing at 15% average growth rate, and it's increasingly effective for more role types and functions. And I saw an interesting stat that said more than 50% of Google are now freelancers, contractors, or self-employed people working for Google. So, this is right to the top of, interesting, challenging tech jobs, right through to, people doing data entry and everything in between. So a really broad range. And that's been accelerated through COVID with the tools and technologies of the last decade that have allowed more and more jobs to be done remotely, both in terms of our acceptance of how we can do it and how we can manage that, but also the tools and security and so on to underpin that. It's not evenly spread, however, and Gen Z are the most active in freelancer employment. So, for the US, 50% of Gen Z are working in freelance roles, 44% of millennials, 30% of Gen X, which is kind of my generation, and 26% of baby boomers, so, people over 55. So there's a real distribution across different ages that varies, and that also shows that this is the future of workplace, because more young people are wanting to work in freelance and self-employed ways. So in order to support that, we need to be making sure that it's inclusive of all people who wish to, including those with disabilities. More disabled people already today are self-employed, certainly in the US and UK, and I'll share this deck with everyone later, but the Bureau of Labour Stats for the US and ONS for Government UK that underpin that. And in freelancer work, just like other employment work, it is gender biased. And for every dollar that a male freelancer earns, 84 cents is earned by a female freelancer. So it is also already discriminatory, as per the mainstream workplace. There's a lovely quote that came from the round table from Albert Aziz Clausen. He's the founder of the Association of the Future of Work, which is, there is an assumption that freelance work offers new opportunities for inclusion and accessibility, but it doesn't necessitate it. And this really goes to intention. There is a great opportunity as these new, particularly tech-enabled platforms and engagers of very broad talent pools across new markets come in to make this a much more inclusive and accessible format. but it will only get there if we do the work. So what's the difference? It's our actions from here. There's a lovely quote also from an article in Forbes that I found that I've also linked to here from Gus Alexiou, which says, though the value of secure full-time employment should never be underrated, home-based freelancing is an extremely useful option for workers who identify as having a disability due to its flexibility and the capacity to absorb some of the health fluctuations many disabled people experience. This has two parts in it. One is we're not trying to underrate the importance of inclusive employment, of traditional employment types. However, this is an alternative option that may work better for some parts of the disability community. So the opportunity, let's look to the positives. It can be more flexible and inclusive, both in locations, so where you're working, how people work, with what tools and technology they prefer to work, and when, because it tends to be more output oriented than input oriented and measuring. There's less potential for discrimination in some ways, or stigma, because the personal needs might not be known to the buyer depending on the situation. If you're creating code or being a voiceover artist or a designer of a new logo, it's not even relevant for the person to know that you may be a wheelchair user or you may have sight loss if you're doing voiceover, etc. So you may have many more what would be visible impairments within a formal workplace setting that are non-visible in this environment, and that can reduce stigma. It can limit income as people prefer and desire, particularly efforts to keep and maintain benefits. I'll talk to that in a moment, such as Medicare or universal credit. And it can balance personal daily living needs for self-management and energy, or family or other caring responsibilities that people can have. Here's a whole lot of quotes, and I'm not going to go through them, but just to pick on a couple of them here. These came from the round table. There are companies expressing they want to work more with people with disabilities. We've heard already today there is increasing demand for people with disabilities, and that recognition of disability-informed perspectives and the value of that. Bob, one of our freelancers, mentioned the positive thing about Open and Fiverr Empower program is they provided training. That helped him feeling that there was a collective voice and I wasn't by myself. And I felt very excited by that. And from Erin, the Global Director at the Association of the Future of Work, the rapid adoption of remote technology has certainly made it easier for people with disabilities to join the freelancer workforce. Well, that's true only when that technology is made to be accessible and inclusive. And I know you, again, Fiverr have done a huge amount of work this year to make their platform more accessible. And with a workplace of 3 million people, there's different sellers on it. That's a very large workplace to make accessible, and a very scalable one once that work has been done. And of course, from the lovely Stefan, who we've already heard from today, I think about the disability talent as an ecosystem. Within the ecosystem, I think the most powerful players are the businesses. Microsoft is an example of an organisation that's providing effective training, offering meaningful work. My point, companies need to get more involved. And when companies are employing freelancers, they need to think intentionally about the impact of various tools, hiring practices, and ways of making the people really powerfully effective once they're in the employment market. On the employment side, equally for employers, particularly those lacking experience in working with disabled people for freelance work, it provides a safe space for dipping a toe into the water, trialling best practice through one-off projects, but also potentially building ongoing relationships with freelancers they collaborate with. Again, from Gus Alexiou in the article from Forbes. And this is a really, a safe place for organisations to learn about disability inclusion and the value of disability inclusive perspectives. So it allows businesses to access a wider talent net. It gives the access to disability-informed perspectives that can particularly support their products in the market and understanding their market better, but also their employees and how their workplace might work for them. And it's a safe place to develop inclusive practices. If potentially their workplace, they're worried about it not being so inclusive, they can start by getting freelancers where they can work from home safely in their own environments and make sure that their tools and their processes and the practices are inclusive while they're building and informing and improving the rest of their environments. And it allows them to leverage freelance platforms that have already done the work, as I've mentioned, which are very at-scale inclusive workplaces. Barriers and opportunities. I'm not going to go through these quotes, but essentially there are two people, Sharon Rush, my lovely friend from Nobility, talking about the barrier that people with disabilities on government benefits face because they rely on an income and they've really got to make sure they don't lose that by earning too much. Well, that's also seen as an opportunity by Albert because with this, partly because it's a new system, we've got the chance to create something new, and partly because there's opportunities to improve for all work formats. And freelancing has inherent characteristics that, if used effectively, promote diversity and inclusion. So essentially, this is a time of transition, and transition allows for challenge and change to the current status quo. That is an opportunity, though there are some structural barriers that need to be addressed in order to release that opportunity. So some of those challenges, skills, education and experience, we've heard a lot about that today. And again, accessible education, making sure that the underlying skills that can be sold into the market are there and effective and up to date, and making sure that accessible formats for education are there for that. But also freelancers to manage time, manage contracting, engaging with clients. And we heard about from our partners in Latin America, from Incluye Me, language skills, and when these partnerships, when these platforms are more based in English, that can exclude those who are Spanish speakers. Stability and sufficiency of earnings, both too much or too little, are a challenge, and alignment to other income and needs, as we've mentioned. There's more quotes here. I won't go through it, but one from Kate I'm just going to mention. I've seen a lot of neurodivergent people in our network doing freelance work on top of something else. There's a bit of concern about income, which is a barrier, particularly in the US. She's the director of the Neurodiversity Employment Network in the US. And from Ali Schmidt, because of my disability, I'm often fatigued, which means I can't work enough or earn enough money. The fees... Could someone go on to mute, please? I'm often fatigued, which means I work enough and I can't work enough to earn enough money. The fees I can earn freelancing on a digital platform are not high enough for the hours I can put into work. So again, recognising this works for some people in some environments with some skills and some backgrounds, and it doesn't work for all people. And how can we get a broader range for more people? There's some more quotes here. I'm going to leave them to you, but just to inform, the one I'm going to bring up here, those from Linda Mickelson, who's the founder of the Local to Global Impact, working between Kenya and European markets. We're working in Kenya, implementing workforce programs. People in Africa with a disability often don't think they have any employment possibilities. We have challenges with respect to people with disabilities not having access to computers, something we take for granted in Europe. We have people with skills, but we need to get them the proper technology in order to be successful. So just as a reminder that in different environments, this does open to a global market, but accessibility can then mean different things. And in this case, actual access to the underlying technology on which people can build careers. And the challenge for brands need to do the work as well, and really training their current hiring staff, managers and employees, just as they would for employing employees with disabilities. Equally true for bringing people in with freelancers, contractors and so on.
Christine,
thank you. Yes, I have just this is my last. Absolutely. Aligning procurement so that people can buy from this area, providing collaborative tools and processes as per any other employment area. Language is an important thing. I'm just going to share what are the next steps. Shared language. We need that. This is a new area. We need shared language. Understanding the barriers. That means engaging with inclusive workplace experts. They are the people with disabilities who are freelancing in the market today, those who are just entering the market and those who would like to enter the market, creating options across the ecosystems, and then continually evolving a more disability inclusive ecosystem. And that includes platforms, practices, policies, and education. Lastly, what to do? just what Susan Scott Parker has already suggested today. You can see I've been keeping this up to date. What about disability? It needs to be asked in these work formats as well. Reach out to us if you're interested in sharing talent pools with disabilities who'd like to find work employment in these formats. That's my email address, or you can find me on LinkedIn and join the Association for Future of Work that's doing fabulous work in this space, both as a think tank and as a practical organisation. Thank you very much.